Arise and shine on this Good Friday. So glad to be with you today on our fifth day of Holy Week. And if you are part of our church community, of course, if you're not as well, just a reminder, and you're welcome to join us tonight at 7 p.m. for our Good Friday worship gathering, which will be live streamed Facebook and YouTube. You can go to southsidealliance.org/SSA live or look for Southside Alliance Facebook page. And we'll be there 7 p.m. tonight. We're looking forward to it. We're going to just have some time of worship together as a community and read scripture together and also receive communion as well. So if you don't have your communion cups, weren't able to get an Easter box or didn't know about it, then just grab something to drink and something to eat and place your faith on it, and Jesus will honor that. Today, though, for our reading, we are in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 27, and it's pretty much all of chapter 27, verses 1 through 61. And today, of course, Good Friday is the scene of Jesus making his final way to the cross, to what we call maybe the consummation in many of our minds, the consummation of his earthly ministry, where God's eternal purposes, Christ's eternal purposes meet the vision of what that would look like on the earth, where heaven and earth in some maybe new way and eternity intersected in a way that every human on earth for all eternity, for as long as humans will be, needed. But I want to read just a short passage of scripture in there as you can take time to read the rest and sit with the Lord. Starting with verse 27 of chapter 27, it says this: Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. As I was listening to the Lord and sitting with him in this scripture, that phrase stuck out to me that the soldiers used to mock him, "Hail, King of the Jews." And to remind you that in verse 37 and in at least one of the other Gospels, it records the same thing. It says here, 37, above his head, they placed the written charge against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. And this was, again, to mock him. This was to make fun of him. This was to point to how ridiculous his claim was that he was the king of anything in light of the way he looked, in light of the way he taught, in light of where he came from. Can anything good come from Nazareth? In light of the twistedness that ruled men's and women's hearts. And as I sat here, it stuck out to me that, yeah, it is true, though they missed it, Jesus actually was King of the Jews. Jesus was far more than that also. And I thought, how wildly humble is this God who came to earth in Jesus, where these people are mocking him, making fun of him. You aren't even King of the Jews. And yet if I were him, I would think, Jesus, why didn't you just say, not only in this moment, not only am I King of the Jews, but I'm the one who formed you and shaped you. I'm the one who by all things came and all things were created, and all things that you see around me, and including you, are for me. I'm King of the universe. I'm King of all creation. And I thought, God, how humble, how overwhelmingly humble could you be? In my understanding, I've never lived under a king, but that if I were a king, or if there were a king and I were part of that kingdom, and I decided to not claim allegiance, I decided to disobey the rules and the laws that the king mandated, I don't follow the decrees of that king's state and whatever he decreed, if I don't follow it, it doesn't make him any less king. He's still the king. It just makes me a rebel within his kingdom. It causes me to be a part of a rebellion. And yet Jesus doesn't say any of that. Jesus didn't say, I'm not only king of the Jews, but I'm king of the world and I demand your allegiance now. Bow to me. Instead, he's quiet. We go on further to see Jesus' humility, and we see it all throughout the Gospels. We see it in his whole life, where these criminals now are mocking him later in verse 37 and through into verse 40, 41, 42, and then you have chief elders and the priests and the teachers of the law. They're now scoffing at Jesus and they're mocking him as well. And they're saying, he can't even save himself. He saved others, but he can't save himself. And that just showed how little they understood. They understood nothing of God. They understood nothing of Jesus. He didn't come to save himself. He came to save us. And Jesus' humility was so confounding that it seems to keep his real purpose hidden from those whose hearts have become hardened, whose hearts are full of sin, like mine was one day before I met Jesus. But I just began thinking about this limited perspective that Jesus is surrounded by in this setting. There's 5 groups of people that don't really get it. There's Pontius Pilate, doesn't see Jesus, though he has a sense. There's these soldiers from the governor. There's the 2 criminals on the cross. There's passers-by in verse 39. And then there's the chief priests and the elders and the teachers of the law, all 5 groups of people. The only one out of those groups of people, the only one who got it was one of the criminals. They saw Jesus for who he was. But I think of this on this Good Friday. I think there's a king who came to earth and bows down and lays his life down so that all people, that those soldiers, that Pontius Pilate, that the chief priests, the elders of the law, the passers-by, those who had no clue what was happening even, they just saw what they thought was a criminal being hung, and the 2 criminals. He lays his life down that we might be saved. And it can be confounding. And in this sense, I just want to submit to you today on what are the places that Jesus wants to give you on this Good Friday a more eternal perspective on. See, if these people, if they could have seen, if they had a sense of eternity, if they knew God's big plan, this ultimate purpose that he had preordained from the beginning of the foundations of the earth, they could have got it. But God's plan played out. Of course, nothing will hinder it, nothing will thwart it, nothing will stop it. But we now, having seen Christ, having encountered him, have this privilege to say to God, I must always, because I must see how you see. Please, Lord, don't just let me see so limited. I want to see eternity. Colossians 3 says, keep your mind on things above. It says, keep focusing on that which is eternal, not that which is on the temporal, earthly things. And maybe in our life right now, season that we're in right now, it's easy to miss, as people missed it. They missed Jesus. He was there and they missed him. It's easy to miss maybe right now for us what God is really wanting us to experience with him, whatever that might be. And I just want to submit and charge you today. Get with Jesus and ask him, what is his perspective? Show me the bigger perspective. Show me what it is to be in an eternal mindset right now. Be it the cross of Christ and just reflecting on Jesus, being with him and worshiping him, and also on the things that I face. My job, my situation at job, my work, being at home, life at home now is a little more wild and frantic. God, how do you want me to see this? How do you want me to see it? Move it from a challenge or frustration to the opportunity to be even more humble. Where Jesus in his humility here, people were confounded, and my wife reminded me at one point years ago, she said also that humility is like camouflage to the enemy. And so our humility is ultimately what Jesus wants to increase in us. It's his humility here living in us to get lower and lower and lower in the situations of our life that we actually might see the way Christ sees. That's why he says, humble yourself in the sight of the Lord and God will lift you up. Why? Because Christ himself was lifted up in his humility. And that's our privilege now too. So enjoy Good Friday. Sit with the Lord, ask him for his perspective, his eternal perspective on what's happening, that we might be a people more liberated in his humility, to meet with him, to be with him, to walk with him, to glorify him.